From blackouts to breakthroughs, we're diving into legislation shaping the U.S. power grid. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Beyond the Bill Number. Today, we're diving into something that we rely on but probably don't think much about. Our power grid. It's aging, it's massive, and it needs a high-tech makeover. But that's not all. There are some serious legislative drivers pushing these changes forward. And with me to break it all down is Stephen. Hey, Stephen, ready to power through this?
Oh, you bet, Sarah. Let's light it up, pun intended.
So, Stephen, the U.S. power grid, stretching over 360,000 miles, serves more than 150 million customers. It's kind of like an old car right now. It's reliable, but it's not ready for the future. It doesn't have those blinking blinder lights and all of that kind of stuff. And, why is modernizing such a big deal in this moment right now?
Well, yes, you're absolutely right. So it is like we've been running the same car for decades, and it's been reliable. It's done the job, but now we need to upgrade it to a Tesla. So energy needs in the US are shifting really, really fast. I mean, you only need to look at electric vehicles. So the growth in electric vehicles is sort of steady. It's not as fast as people are predicting. There are a lot of sort of speed bumps in the way to actually adopting electric vehicles, but it is happening. The move is happening. People are moving more to electric vehicles, and obviously that means we need a lot more electricity. Then you've got data centers, particularly data centers that are running AI. AI is incredibly power hungry. So as AI becomes more and more ubiquitous, and we use more and more of these kinds of models, data centers and the sort of computing centers will use even more power. And then there is that switch to renewable energy as well, which is inherently unreliable. The wind doesn't always blow, the sun doesn't always shine. So you need to approach energy in a different way and have this sort of mix of energy. And the grid just simply wasn't designed to handle it. I mean, put simply, if you think about where the electricity comes from, it comes from power stations, and those power stations are in certain points. So all the grid focuses into those particular points where the power stations are. Now, your new wind farms or your solar farms may be in completely different places. So how do you connect them into that grid, and how do you make sure that the capacity of the actual wires and so on is enough to cope with all this extra demand? Then you've got to say the transition away from fossil fuels as well means decreasing those more sort of stable elements of your grid while increasing the less stable ones, which is obviously quite a difficult sell, really. So yeah, modernization, making sure we can meet demand, but stay flexible, and obviously prevent those blackouts. And then on top of that, you've got the looming threat from cyber attack and natural disasters as well.
Right, yeah, because the grid outage isn't just an inconvenience, it can be catastrophic. And with all this new demand and our newly found crazy hurricanes that are coming in hot, we really do need to be able to have access to power when we need to. The case of Texas is a really good example of that, where people were literally dying because they couldn't get heat.
Yep.
So anyways, speaking of EVs, they've been a big driver for the grid updates, and the demand has really skyrocketed in the last few years, with 50% more electricity consumed by EVs in early 2024 compared to last year. So how does this legislation kind of play a role in supporting this shift over?
Well, legislation is doing a lot of the heavy lifting here, really. So, in particular, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which alone poured $7.5 billion into EV charging infrastructure. And on top of that, you've got the Inflation Reduction Act, which offers tax credits for people buying EVs. So, all part of this broader push to get people driving electric vehicles, move away from the internal combustion engine, which, as we know, is polluting and sort of damaging the environment and so on. But at the same time, it's just driving up that demand for more electricity. And America has a particular problem here, where small countries like England, not so much, in that the range of electric vehicles is limited. So while they're great for buzzing around in the city, you've got your Waymo taxis and so on in San Francisco. They're great just buzzing around there and being able to go and charge whenever they need to. But what about if you're driving across Wyoming? So you need this network of convenient charging points if EVs are ever to be really viable, just like you now have a network of places where you can fill up your car with gas. So California, which unsurprisingly leads the way here, they introduced a bill this year, AB 2696, 2007, and it passed and has been enacted. And it requires the big EV charging point providers to accept payments from other providers. Now, this is really, really important. So if you're driving across the country, you don't have to find a particular charging point by your particular company. You can basically just charge at any charging point, and then the companies will work out the payment between them. So really important to sort of expand this capacity, really. And it's unsurprising, really, that California would do this because it does lead the way in EV cars. It has by far the highest proportion of EVs, and almost a third of all EV charging points in the country are
Wow.
within California, really. But they need to make sure as well, just as all the other states, that the national grid is actually strong enough to handle the new load. So yeah, without these updates, charging your EV would be like trying to run a hairdryer in a tent. Good luck with that.
We'll definitely need more than a tent for that. So we've got this old grid. We're trying to adapt it to new tech like EVs and data centers, which are consuming more and more power each and every day, especially with OpenAI and all of the AI that we're all now running. Data centers alone used about 2% of the US electricity in 2020, which is wild. So how is this legislation tracking this huge power drain that essentially just is getting more and more day by day?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's pretty crazy, really. It's something that most people don't realize. You use your computer, you know that there's a server somewhere that's running the software that's storing all the data and so on. You don't realize quite how much power that takes and how it's been increasing all the time. And states themselves are getting quite worried about this as well. So Virginia is notable here because Virginia has the highest concentration of data centers in the entire world. A staggering percentage of the internet actually runs from Virginia.
Wow.
They are pushing for energy efficiency standards because it sucks up such an enormous amount of power. So this year they introduced HB 116 to legislate for sort of better efficiency, and it didn't pass. But the idea is sound. It's basically saying we'll give you tax breaks if you adopt all of these efficiency standards. So the idea is to stop these energy guzzlers from actually draining the grid dry and leave a bit of power for the rest of us. Some projections actually say that demand from data centers could quadruple by 2035. So we need to curb demand, but it's not just about that. It's also about making the grid smarter and more efficient. And that brings us, of course, to smart grids.
Smart grids. Is that where the real tech magic
Smart grids.
happens? What makes these grids so smart, and why is that such a big focus for these modernization efforts?
Well, so you can think of a smart grid as a grid with a brain. So old-fashioned grids, you put energy in one end, it comes out the other end. But a smart grid uses digital technology to actually communicate with the power plants and the consumers, making it much more efficient and able to respond to changes like when demand spikes because everyone plugs their EVs in after work or switches on their favorite soap opera or whatever. And the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act puts $3 billion towards this. So more smart meters, better energy management across the board. It's a real game changer, actually, for efficiency. You see a lot of new schemes at the moment where they try and persuade people to do things at different times of the day, where you can get actually discounts on your energy if you promise to not put your washing machine on until 1 o'clock in the morning or something, just to try and smooth out those differences in demand. Because obviously, key thing about electricity is you can't really store it. You just need to generate it as you need it. So when there's a big demand, you need to switch on more power stations, and then those power stations aren't needed later. You can switch them off again. It's very difficult to do that with most forms of energy, actually, to switch it on and off. So it's much better if you can actually smooth out the demand throughout the day, and then it's just much more reliable.
Yeah, I've noticed that my iPhone, when I plug it in at night, it'll be like, we're not charging your phone until 2 a.m., but it will be fully charged by
Yeah,
the time that your alarm goes
there
off.
you
And I'm like, well, look at
go.
that. Okay, well, this sounds like a huge win for managing demand, but we can't really talk about modernizing the grid without mentioning renewable energy, right? So solar, wind, they're great, but they're also unpredictable, as you mentioned. And how are lawmakers dealing with this challenge? Are they looking at other types of renewables? Are they looking at other types of energy that is, getting away from this coal and gas?
Well, it's a very good point, isn't it? The renewables are key to reducing carbon emissions, which we absolutely have to do. But yeah, as I said, the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow, and that's where energy storage also comes into play. So the Inflation Reduction Act is backing it out with tax credits for energy storage solutions. So you can store surplus energy when we have it and use it when we need it. So as I say, you can't store electricity, but you can store other things. And there's a variety
Mhm.
of other ways of doing it. So you use energy, for example, to produce something that can be stored, like hydrogen. And then when you don't have the energy, you burn that hydrogen to actually sort of produce the energy that you need. So there are ways of sort of storing the energy that this electricity is producing when you don't need it, so that you can then use it when you do, and actually keep the lights on.
It's like putting solar energy on layaway.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the states are obviously legislating for this as well. California, as we always said, is always leading the way on these things. And in 2018, they passed SB 100, which requires the state to generate 100% of all its retail energy from renewables by 2045. And they're making really, really good progress towards that as well. There's a series of milestones, and they're hitting their milestones. So they're really going for it. Colorado has a very interesting sort of approach. For a while now, they've been incentivizing what they call community solar. So that encourages communities to set up their own solar farms, and they do it through basically making energy companies buy this electricity at a reasonable rate so that it's actually
Hmm.
profitable. Because the key to making all this stuff happen is, of course, that it's profitable. It's not a burden on anyone. You should actually be able to make money from it. If you can make money from it, then people will do it.
In Colorado, we do have over 300 days of sunshine a year, so we may as well harness
Okay.
that. I also like
Exactly. We
noticed
should
on
say the
my
sixth
yeah.
sunniest state in the US.
Oh, and it's wow! I didn't know we were that far down. I would have thought we were number one.
Sorry, New Mexico, Texas.
Yeah, well, and it's
Yeah,
interesting because even on my Excel bill, I can choose to get all my energy from wind energy if I wanted to, but I
exactly.
actually have solar panels on my house, so I don't do that. But an interesting piece of this is also that Energizing Our Communities Act that I talked about a little bit earlier this year, and that is an
Mm,
IRA follow-on that is trying to give grants to
mm,
communities to do these types of things like solar farms or other things like that, and get the communities to deal with all the permitting and get support there. And it's really interesting because the grants that they get, they can use, I think it's up to 80% of it for community improvement projects like roads or schools
mm.
or other things that matter to
Okay.
communities. But then they have to use
Yeah.
20% of it for other types of renewable energies, grid modernization, other
Mm,
things like that. And so it is really interesting to see all this legislation. And it sounds
yeah.
like we still have some pretty big challenges to overcome. The Energizing
Yeah.
Our Communities Act is like a really interesting little subset of this. But the aging infrastructure, regulatory hurdles, it's all making these benefits a little hard for these communities to reach and to institute. So what's
Mm.
next for general grid modernization?
Well, yes, it's definitely a long road ahead. So there are billions earmarked for upgrades, but replacing old infrastructure is expensive and slow. And then we run up against yet another problem, which is facing a lot of industries these days, which is a lack of skilled workers. So there simply aren't the people with the skills to do this either. And so that's slowing things down as you have to retrain people, you have to find more workers. And then the challenge of making sure that rural and lower income areas get their fair share of the improvements as well, because these things tend to cluster around obviously the big cities and so on. As always, anything talking about energy or access to sort of broadband and so on in the US always comes down to what about rural communities. But hey, every challenge is also an opportunity. So there's a ton of potential here for job creation, innovation, and then there's the environmental benefits as well. So the next wave of billionaires and trillionaires may well be people who are innovating in this space, and that would be a good thing for everyone.
That is a really great way to look at it. All right, Stephen. Last question. If you had to pick one trend that you think will really shape the future of our grid, what would it be?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of stuff going, a lot of really exciting stuff going on at the moment. But the rise of distributed energy is a really interesting one. Things like rooftop solar. So instead of one massive grid, you end up with lots of smaller localized grids that all fit together and so on. And that can make the whole system more resilient and flexible, and able to handle like extreme weather or cyber threats. A bit like the internet, really. The internet was designed, obviously, by DARPA to be distributed so that if you take out one bit of it, the rest of it carries on working. And it would be the same with these sort of distributed energy
Hmm.
networks as well. It's definitely the future.
I love that. Well, That's all for today's episode. Grid modernization isn't just about wires and transformers. It's about creating a smarter, greater, and more resilient energy future for us all. So thanks for tuning in. And as always, keep an eye on what's beyond the bill number.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. So don't forget to like and subscribe and let us know if you want us to cover anything specific in the comments.